Zelphia went to her grave knowing a lot about a lot of people.
Two people, the same family, the same year, too much there to be coincidence.
We live in fear. We had two family members missing. Who was going to be next?
We started to locate the first bone.
You just got a cold feeling.
Could this be the unknown crime scene we've been looking for all these years?
When an investigation runs out of leads, it becomes a cold case. Years pass, and hope fades. But for the families of the victims, these cases are never cold. The truth takes time. In the deep woods of Appalachia, nothing is what it seems. When her sister disappears, Reba is desperate for answers. Meanwhile, a detective spends decades determined to uncover the one thing he knows might close the case: the crime scene.
When Zelphia was born, I was just so excited because she was born a day after my birthday. I was 10 years old. I made her bottles, I changed her diapers. She was just like my real life baby doll. She loved writing poems, and she loved unicorns. She collected them. She could get down to like a child's level, always, wanting to joke and play and just have fun. Everybody's kids loved her so much.
She was my favorite aunt. I loved her with all my heart. I really think I loved her more than I loved my parents at times. I myself had an amazing bond with her, but it was nothing like Jeremiah's.
Jeremiah was Zelphia's nephew. He was a very quiet person. He hardly ever would talk much to anybody. They were sort of like brother and sister because they were so close to each other.
Jeremiah was raised in some pretty rough circumstances. His father, Eddie, was gone quite a bit, and I think it was a neglectful relationship.
There was one time Zelphia and Jeremiah witnessed something really bad. They were parked at Eddie's girlfriend's house. Eddie comes and tells them to leave. Then, right after they leave, he burns the house down. Zelphia and Jeremiah, they didn't go to no authorities or nothing like that. They just kept it quiet, told a few family members, and that was it. My brother had been coming back to Marion, and he seen Jeremiah's truck on the side of the interstate. Jeremiah was living with his friends at the time. The boys that he was staying with said that he left and went to his daddy's. And that was the last time he was ever seen.
Jeremiah was missing, but there was no real evidence of a crime. There was not a lot of concern on the part of the investigators at the time. They'd heard rumors that Jeremiah had probably gotten in a truck with a truck driver and gone somewhere to Texas. They had hoped he was somewhere where he wanted to be, on a beach in Mexico, enjoying the sunshine.
Zelphia knows he did not leave town.
Zelphia had come to my house, and she was just really upset. She said Jeremiah would not have left without telling her. And she goes, I want to tell you about a dream that I had last night. She dreamed that Jeremiah's own daddy, Eddie Pittman, had killed Jeremiah. And had buried him. And put lime on him. It made my heart beat so fast. And she told me she was going to confront him, and I begged her to not confront him because I was scared for her life. She wasn't going to stop till she found out what happened to Jeremiah. She was not going to stop. Zelphia was a waitress. She worked at the truck stop, which was just a little ways down the road from her house. Zelphia would walk to work and back home sometimes, if somebody didn't give her a ride. One day, Zelphia didn't come home after work. I filed a missing persons report. The sheriff's department didn't believe us.
Law enforcement at the time felt that she's not missing, she's just gone because she wanted to be gone. Zelphia was pretty much a free spirit. She liked to have a good time. It wasn't that unusual for her to decide that she was going to be gone for 2 or 3 days.
We had 2 family members missing. They was making every excuse in the world they could to keep from looking for Jeremiah and Zelphia. Everybody in that sheriff's office was awful. You could walk in and they looked at you like you was trash, like, we wasn't worthy. One time, they told me to go do my own investigation to get rid of me. I go to the truck stop and I start asking questions. Nobody wanted to talk to me about it. I tried everything that I could. I wanted to know what happened. I wanted it for her. I wanted it for us, my family.
There were some hunters out in a remote area of our county around Lake James who ran across the remains. There were some fragments of hair and some tissue adhering to some of the bones, but the remains were skeletonized. almost completely. There wasn't any type of burial or real concealment. It appeared like that the body was just left on top of the ground, and there had been some animal activity. There was also a sheet and a towel and some clothing that was identified as Zilphia's.
I knew it was her. I could feel it before they even confirmed that it was her.
She had suffered severe trauma to the head. Her skull was almost crushed completely. Her remains had been dumped there. There was another crime scene somewhere. They just did not know where that was.
Since Zilphia's remains were found, then they have to take it serious. They have to investigate.
All of a sudden, law enforcement says it's time to pursue this thing. Now we have a murder. Marion is a rural community in Appalachian foothills. The mountains have their own kind of culture, with our share of problems as well. I took an interest in the Lowry case early on. I was working in a small town in a neighboring county. I heard that there had been a body found. The first day I came to work, there was a case file left on the desk of one of the investigators, and that was Zilphia's case file. I've always been one that likes a challenge, and so I approached the detective captain and asked him, "Do you mind if I pick up that file and take a look at it?" He looked at me and he said, "Get it, take it, solve it." The scene where Zilphia's remains were recovered is certainly one crime scene that we had. If we could locate that second crime scene, that's probably where we're going to find our murderer. At the same time I was going through that file, I was trying to digest the Jeremiah Pittman file. We had two people in the same family, in the same year, go missing. One of them turns up dead, one of them still missing. These cases either have to be related or it is a real coincidence. When you're taking on a case, you have to pick up the ball from where it is. It's kind of like drinking from a fire hose because there's so much information and it's coming at you like crazy. First, we needed to go back and talk to people at the last place Zilphia was seen, the truck stop. One of the individuals who discussed last seeing Zilphia said that she got in the car with someone, but nobody knew who he was or where they were going. We needed to try to get some more information. I visited McDowell County Jail. Jails can become somewhat of a rumor mill. There were people who, for one reason or another, wanted to interject themselves into this case. One individual talked about being with some guys when they had taken a blonde-haired girl wrapped up in a sleeping bag, carried her out in the woods and left her there. Another guy claimed that he had been asked by a drug dealer to take this girl away because she had been killed. I heard 11 or 12 different versions of what happened to Zilphia. It was kind of a moving target, so to speak. I arranged a sit down with several of the family members to see what information they might be able to give.
We were so desperate to try to find out something. I was just happy that there was someone to listen and try to help. We had 2 family members missing, Zelphia and Jeremiah. To me, all signs pointed to one person, Jeremiah's daddy, Eddie Pittman. I told Detective Green about Zelphia's dream. Zelphia just knowed that dream was telling her Eddie had killed Jeremiah. If he killed Jeremiah, he could kill her too.
Reba described a dream. From an investigator's standpoint, we have to deal in terms of evidence that we have, and dreams or visions are not evidence.
So I said, okay, I really thought that Eddie did it, and I'll tell you why. Zelphia and Jeremiah witnessed Eddie burning the house down for his girlfriend, Rosemary, so she can get insurance money.
If Eddie burned Rosemary's house and they had witnessed that, that could be a possible motive for murder. We felt like we had enough information to talk to Eddie.
Ed was in denial of having anything to do with Jeremiah's disappearance, and he was in total denial about Zelphia, doesn't know anything about her murder.
We've got to do something with this lead here. We've got to be able to develop it further or eliminate it. And so we just keep working at it over the next several months. One day, the chief deputy came back to my office and he looked at me and he said, "Rosemary Gehring's in the lobby, wants to talk to you." And I looked at him, I said, "What about?" And he said, "I don't know." She was led back to my office and came in, and she had a concerned look on her face. And I'm like, "Rosemary, how can I help you today?" And she said, "Well, I wanted to come see you. I think Eddie's gonna kill me." "Why do you think Eddie would want to kill you?" And she said, "Because of what I could say." When Rosemary walked in my office that day, the last thing I thought I'd be doing would be driving her around while she's pointing where to go. She had said, "I think Eddie Pittman is gonna kill me because of what I know." We ride down to this real remote area. All of a sudden, she stops. She walks over to a ditch, points in the ditch, and she says, "It's right there. Start digging."
We spent quite a bit of time digging. We weren't finding anything.
She walked over to the ditch. She said, "You're in the right place, but you're not deep enough." We continued to dig, and we started to locate the first bone. Exactly where she pinpointed is where Jeremiah's remains were found. Your heart's jumping through your chest. And so she began to tell the story of witnessing a confrontation between Ed and Jeremiah, where Jeremiah ended up dead. Eddie picked up a hammer so he could finish Jeremiah off. They had taken Jeremiah's truck and abandoned it out on the interstate. Rosemary had gone with him to dispose of the body. Part of what they did in disposing of him was to pour the lime in the hole.
And Zelfia's nightmare came true. Her dream was given to her for a reason.
Zelfia knew where Jeremiah was. She knew exactly where he was.
Whoa, here, this is not just some abstract dream. This is real. Blunt force injury to the head. It was just like Zelfia's murder.
Ed Pittman, for heaven's sakes, killed his own son. Killed him the same way Zelfia was killed, in the same county, during the same year.
There's too much there to be coincidence. Was it actually a dream? We don't know. But she knew what happened to Jeremiah.
We went to Ed's house. A number of us went out there, not knowing what Eddie might be capable of.
He advised Eddie that we had a warrant for his arrest and that he was under arrest for murder. And I'll never forget the reaction Eddie gave me. He said, "Whose murder?" Now we're really convinced Eddie could have killed Zelfia. I said, "Let me ask you a question. What happened to Zelfia?" He hadn't seen her and he didn't know anything about her.
Eddie don't confess to nothing.
We haven't found any evidence to connect Ed to Zelfia, nothing solid. We've got her body, that's all we have.
He was charged with Jeremiah's murder. He pled guilty and there was a plea agreement to manslaughter.
I really thought that Eddie did it. But he got rid of Zelfia because of her suspicions of him. I think Eddie Pittman got away with my sister's murder.
I think the family thought that Eddie could have killed Zelfia, but we're not finding anything. Sure, there's a lot of speculation, some suspicious circumstances, but nothing you can really hang your hat on. I started to think that Eddie Pittman had nothing to do with this. The longer a case goes, the less likely they are to be solved. You know that statistically. With Zelfia, you don't have suspects, you don't have a direction to go, you don't have really any indication of what happened. The case was cold, very cold.
All those years, not knowing, not hearing nothing. I didn't know who killed her, but I knowed somebody in that town knew something.
The 10-year anniversary of Zelfia's murder. Detective Green gets a story to run in the local paper. He hopes the story might spark a confession.
Was trying to pull at some heartstrings there. Emotions can be a strong motivator for somebody to talk. We were approached by a prisoner in jail. His name was Ricky. He gives us a name, Ronald. Ricky thinks that Ronald may have been involved in Zelfia's death. Several years ago, Ronald had shown up in a van with a fairly significant blood stain shortly after Zelfia's disappearance. We are cautiously optimistic that this may be the break we've been looking for. And so We began trying to find that van. We found the van. We ultimately ended up finding it in a junkyard. It had been there for a long time. There were some stains in that van that appeared like they could be blood stains. There's a chemical called phenolphthalein, which is a test for the presence of blood. And when phenolphthalein reacts with blood, it turns a bright pink color. They were not blood stains. And so Ronald's van was not the crime scene. But Zilphia's family came to us with the suggestion that we might want to talk with Ronald.
Ronald was friends with my son. One day, Ronald had told my son that he knows what happened to my sister.
I remember sitting down with Ronald, and pretty much one of the first things that Ronald comes with was, I can tell you what happened to Zilphia. Ronald said that at the time that Zilphia disappeared, there were two guys who lived in a mobile home near a friend of Ronald's. Ronald said that his friends had gone over there one night to ask him to turn some music down, and that they was real suspicious of the way they'd answered the door and wouldn't let anybody in. And then later that night, Ronald's friends actually saw two guys moving something that looked like a rolled up carpet or something to that nature. Ronald said that maybe he's hauling her body away. The first reaction is, could this be real? This story that Ronald was telling us could have just been a smokescreen to throw us in another direction. Yet at the same time, he had given a pretty good description of where that trailer was. We made a decision to try to find that trailer. And, you know, it's been 11 or 12 years. Is the trailer even still there?
Well, Dudley went out to the area that Ronald had described.
I found the landlady. She walked over, pointed out the trailer. Here it is.
It was an abandoned old single-wide trailer. And she confirmed that, back around 1993, there was a guy that had lived at that mobile home. And she gave us the last name of Whited, Robin Whited. At that point, I got a cold feeling.
Animals had been in the trailer. Just the sheer cold feeling that I got. Strange, very strange. I don't know. I almost wondered. It almost had that feeling about it. I don't know. Could this really be where Zilphia was murdered? Could this be the unknown crime scene we've been looking for all these years? We weren't sure whether this was our crime scene, but we had a name. This guy, Robin, might be able to give us some answers.
The landlord told us that Robin had moved back to what she thought was Richlands, Virginia area.
We went to Virginia, seeing if we could locate this Robin and have a conversation with him.
I was able to locate where Robin was, working at a car dealership. He was very polite and acknowledged almost right away that, yeah, they had partied with some girl, and she had a strange name. I mentioned the name Zelfia, and he said, yeah, that sounds right. Showed him a picture of Zelfia, and he acknowledged that, yeah, that's the girl that he had partied with.
He remembers this blonde-haired girl coming over to party one night, that he had had sex with her, but the next morning, she was gone. He did not know when she left exactly. And he had no knowledge or clue that she had met with any kind of foul play.
If he'd said, I don't know what you're talking about, don't know this girl, never saw her before, we basically would have shut us down again, and we would have come back empty-handed.
But now we have direct information that places Zelfia at that trailer, and now we're walking away with a suspect. We really didn't have any physical evidence against Robin. But because of what Robin had said, we're even more convinced that the trailer is where Zelfia was murdered. We knew Zelfia had died from extensive blunt force trauma. The medical examiner had told us we likely had a bloody crime scene. So we had hoped, best case scenario, we might be able to find some blood, even after all these years. It had been somewhat open to the elements, so we knew we were up against some pretty staggering odds. It was the ultimate Hail Mary pass.
Myself and the other detectives were taking swabs of any place and every place that blood spatter might still be. Not likely, but you always have that hope. After several hours, every one of us was just drenched with sweat, but we weren't finding anything.
At this point, he'd probably done 150 swabs.
Sometimes you see something that you didn't see before. I knew that flies are naturally attracted to blood, and flies constantly excrete and regurgitate. Whatever they get into, they're leaving traces of that somewhere. I was looking up at the bathroom ceiling and saw these dozen or so little brown specks. I'm thinking it might be fly speck. So I climbed up on the edge of the tub and just swabbed the specks and handed those down for analysis.
All of a sudden, one of those swabs, it lights up brilliant pink. Yes, this is what we've been looking for. I mean, there were some high fives went up. Happy as we were, that still didn't say whether this was Zelfia's blood. We did not have anything to compare a sample with, because in 1994, when Zelfia's remains were found, DNA wasn't as prevalent a science, and so there was no sample of her DNA that was preserved. Where do we go from here?
I knew we had to do it in order to get her DNA.
When you reach out to a family and say, we're headed down this road, as an investigator, that's not something you take lightly.
I told them to do what they needed to do. And they wanted to know if I wanted to be there when she was exhumed. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't rebury her.
It's something that needs to be done with dignity and respect. And yet at the same time, you're on a search for evidence.
Since it was just bones, they put all of her bones in a little baby casket. And that's how we buried her.
I never will forget the look on my son's face when I went home that day, and I went home to change clothes. He asked me why I got so dirty. And, you know, explained to him, he knows what Daddy does for a living, but yet didn't necessarily think about his dad going digging up a grave, you know. That's one of those things that stay with you. But it was a pretty good day when that lab report came back.
I was crying. I was saying, oh my God, the DNA matched in that trailer.
That's when you know you're on the right road. There's no doubt there anymore.
We're gonna get these guys. We're gonna get them.
Detective Shook and Detective Green came into the district attorney's office, and what they told me was that they had a suspect, Robin White. And now I've got a piece of physical evidence I can take to the jury. This is a circumstantial case. We're building it brick by brick by brick by brick.
Robin, I'm just going to ask you about the death of Zilphia Lowry.
I came in from work that evening. Bobby had his girl's phone number. And said he wanted to call her here to open 40.
When you say Bobby, Bobby Taylor.
Yes.
Okay. Robin was able to give us a name, and that was Bobby Taylor. Bobby has an extensive criminal record with some violent offenses on his rap sheet.
Robin was having sex with Zilpha. Bobby wanted his turn. But Zilpha doesn't want any part of Bobby Taylor. Bobby Taylor becomes angry with Zilpha, then slams Zilpha's head into the floor several times.
Robin said that he had personally witnessed Bobby beat her to death.
We've got an eyewitness to a murder.
Robin was charged as an accessory. We find out where Bobby is. Bobby's in federal prison. Bobby remembered this blonde-haired girl had come over to his trailer and partied one night, but his story was that when he had last seen her, she was alive and well. So we started confronting him with some of the things that Robin said, and Bobby pretty well shut down. And I said, Bobby, I've been doing this for 25 years. And he looked at me and he said, what you don't understand is I've been doing this for 25 years. And he was sitting in prison at the time. He was no stranger to trouble. This was something that Bobby was kind of accustomed to.
Before the trial of Robert Taylor, Robin comes down for an interview and brings with him a videotape.
This is the videotape Robin White had made along about the time of Zilphia's disappearance.
As the trial progresses, we played this videotape for the jury. It's the crime scene as it was 13 years ago. At one point, he zeroed in on the bathroom where Zilpha died. argued to the jury that Robin knows what happened, that he has a guilty conscience of it, that he did what Bobby Taylor told him to do because he was scared of Bobby Taylor, that his guilty conscience made him this videotape. The jury has reached a verdict, and the judge has Bobby Taylor stand up.
When he got up, he looked and stared. Each one of the family members was sitting on the seats and smiled this smirky smile at us. He had the devil in his eyes. I seen the devil's in his eyes.
When we were able to bring this case together, I felt like it was the answer to a lot of prayers. Mine too.
Greene and the McDowell County Sheriff's Department finally deliver justice as Bobby Taylor is imprisoned for the murder of Zilphia. After 15 years, Zilphia's family finally has the truth and hopefully some comfort.
This is where she died, right here. I loved Zilphia more than anybody in this world. The pain's still there. I still feel it. I'd like to see it just demolished. Get rid of the evilness.
I have dreams of her. She looks the same in my dreams as she did when she was 24 years old. I really do think that dreams are given to us sometimes for reasons. In my dreams, Zilphia's always smiling, and I'm just happy. Now she can rest in peace.
We brought her to the city. She comes to Ohio and she gets killed.
She was covered in blood when she ran from that apartment.
She just slipped out of his hands.
The amount of blood and the blood spattering, this was a horrible homicide.
She stabbed the lady in the neck.
We knew that he was either in on it or he knew who the killer was.
This is my last chance. She was the last suspect that we had to go on.
When an investigation runs out of leads, it becomes a cold case. Years pass, and hope fades. But for the families of the victims, these cases are never cold. The truth takes time. On a quiet Sunday morning, Anna Mae Florence gets ready for a day of shopping with her family. There's a knock at the door, but it's not who she's expecting. Her killer slips away, leaving a single clue, a partial bloody fingerprint.
That morning, Anna Mae Florence was waiting for her sister and brother-in-law to pick her up. They were going to go for a day of shopping. Lily and Alonzo went up to her apartment. Anna started screaming inside the apartment. Anna Mae yells out to Alonzo to kick the door in. As he's getting ready to kick it, this woman comes running out. She was covered in blood when she ran from that apartment.
Alonzo had her. He had her tight. But she just slipped out of his hands.
Alonzo chased after her. It said as she was running away, she told me to get away from her or she would shoot. Alonzo came back.
And they went in there and they found her on the floor and she was bleeding quite a bit.
They found her with a cord around her neck.
She was conscious. He asked her, "Who is that?" She said she didn't know. And then she was gone.
She's been stabbed, she's been beaten, she's been murdered. Just like if she's gone, they've taken her away from us.
When we entered Anna Mae's apartment, it was apparent that there had been an extensive struggle. There was some overturned furniture, and then the amount of blood and the blood spattering. The knife wounds near her neck. There's going to be probably arterial gushing, squirting all over the place as she is struggling with the assailant. This was a horrible homicide.
They were going through that place. They collected a fan, a chair, several large items of property. Out of all the evidence that they collected in that place, the real evidence was a single bloody print.
The fingerprint was gold in this case.
The detectives cut out a portion of the wall that had one unidentified partial print.
It made sense that this female inside the apartment just had bumped her hand along the wall enough to make the fingerprint.
She was my dad's sister that I dearly loved. And she was brought up here by her sisters and brothers from Alabama. We brought her to the city to give her a different look of life. And she comes to Ohio and she gets killed. We cleaned out the apartment. There was blood where she lied on the floor. The police kept saying they had nothing really to go on. All they had was what my aunt told them, that she was a black girl.
The detectives back then, they used what they had to work with. DNA wasn't around yet. Fingerprints, interviews, and that's all they had. The original detectives thought that suspect lived in that neighborhood, so they canvassed the area.
They had talked to several neighbors. You did have witnesses that saw a young female dressed up really nice, going door to door, asking for money. One witness had said back then it was for a funeral.
The detectives interviewed several young girls that lived in the neighborhood that fit the description. They took fingerprints, hoping to get a match to the partial print that they had got from the crime scene. At that point, they all met with negative results, and none of them could be charged. At this point, there's nothing. We're just waiting for that one piece of evidence, that one phone call. There was a tip called in. this tip had some valuable information.
The day after it happened, I was over to some friend's house.
He had been at a party, and he had heard a female talking about her involvement in the homicide.
He told them that she stabbed the lady. She stabbed the lady in the neck. Stabbed her 2 or 3 times.
Here you have somebody that calls in on their own, anonymously, with information about a homicide case. How great is that?
When I heard her talking about it, and then she had scratches on her hands and stuff, you know, I guess when somebody had been grabbing her, and she had a couple bruises on her arm.
Hell, you could run all day with this stuff.
The only reason I'm doing this is because, you know, I have people that live over there.
Well, we need all the help we can get. Do you want to give us your name at this time?
No, not really.
He didn't want to give his name up because he had promised he would not say anything to anybody.
Not for sure.
The detectives tell him, you're not a suspect in this.
Okay, my name is Odell. O-D-E-L-L.
He provided his social security number and his birthday. Odell was a big lead.
I know the person that did the crime.
Okay. Do you know her name?
Yeah.
Odell said, well, the suspect was a female by the name of
Anita Campbell.
Danita.
I know Danita pretty well. We went to school together for 3 years.
We wanted to obviously talk to Odell in person.
He came into headquarters.
We asked Odell if he would be willing to make contact with Danita.
So would you consider helping us by wearing a wire?
Yeah.
This was a big development.
He was gonna try to help in trapping Danita.
But then all of a sudden, he decided he didn't want to be involved. At that point, the detectives lost all contact with Odell.
Frustrated, yes. I would say half the time informants disappear. Their world just doesn't coincide with law enforcement's world a lot of the times.
But with the information from Odell, they still have one promising lead. They were interested in tracking down Danita to get her prints and try to compare them to the print that was on the wall. There was plainclothes officers looking for her. And once they had located Danita driving around in her vehicle, a traffic stop was conducted. She was removed from the vehicle. Her prints were taken right there on the hood of her car. The detectives took the prints to the fingerprint unit, and they compared those fingerprints to that fingerprint on the wall. They thought it had to be a match. It had to be Danita.
The original detectives had one unidentified partial print, so they were attempting to match this print to Danita. They did locate her, and they got her prints at the scene. At that point, that's all they had to work with, and that took some time. They were in there for a while.
If it's a poor quality print, you may look at it for days.
There was a smear of blood on the print that was on the wall. So the quality of the fingerprint taken wasn't that good.
The detectives that had originally worked that back in 1987, they did good work. But at that point, they had nothing else to go on.
Police weren't gonna find that girl. Police weren't gonna find her because nobody was talking.
If people do not talk to the police, your chances of solving crimes are basically shot.
The girl was gone. She was gone.
When your information dries up, you come to an abrupt halt. Anna Mae's case went to the edge of the desk, and we had to move on to other cases.
The police kept saying they had nothing really to go on. That's why it became a cold case.
My dad, he just couldn't handle that. He was angry. Every week he was calling a detective, find that girl who killed my sister.
I wanted that girl to be found so that he could have peace. It actually aged him and made him die faster.
Before he passed, he made me promise that I would find that girl who killed his sister. I knew that I had to do it.
After her father's dying wish, Becky makes hundreds of phone calls to the police, trying to reopen her aunt's case. One fateful day, a new detective answers her call.
I was at my desk, and the phone rang.
I asked her, who's working on the case?
She's talking, I'm punching on the computer, pulling this up, making sure we actually do have a case. When I saw the details that led up to the homicide, you're sitting there thinking this is a true victim. Anna Mae Florence, church-going woman in her own home, and somebody just came in and just tore that family apart. Senseless. These people need answers to their case.
Nobody is at peace until these cases are solved. There comes a time, whether a case be 5 years old, 10 years old, 30 years old, God wants it taken care of.
We pretty much started at the beginning. For me to get a feel for Anna Mae, I had to go to the cemetery itself, and it just makes it more real for me. It may not work for another detective, but it works. It works for me.
The evidence may be old, the people may be older, but to us it's new. It's just happened.
As I was reviewing the case, my focus was that we needed a new angle. I wanted to look back into evidence, witnesses, prints, and the crime scene, try to find anything missed in the original investigation.
Everything happened inside the apartment. That's where the story is. This is the aerial shot as it looks today. The crime scene would have been in this area here. That has since been torn down, and new houses have been built on that site. The crime scene was tore down after this murder.
The crime scene's gone. We need to find something that the original detectives missed, but we were going to have to do it with the site of the crime completely demolished.
All we have left is the evidence.
We came up with a game plan. Okay, we're going to go over to the property room and we're going to look at the evidence. This stuff has to be done. You know, there ain't no fiddle around with this stuff. You just do it.
People either remember, they don't remember, they lie, or they don't lie. But your evidence never lies. In cold case, your job is to find out what happened to the victim, and a lot of times you're turning back time. We knew this was going to be made on prints. So we're trying to look at this evidence for prints, any identified prints, anything they missed. The crime scene was really bloody. You know, we knew that the suspect had touched certain things. This chair was kind of tipped over in the crime scene like that. This fan was also tipped over and was close to the victim's body. This butcher knife here is the actual murder weapon. It was found laying next to the victim. This door was really bloody. This poor lady, she was struggling for her life in there. That's what it says, just by looking at the evidence. At some point during the struggle, the victim was struck, possibly with this part of the phone, by the suspect. I'd be lying if I said it didn't bother me. Yeah, it bothers me, but puzzles not together till you check all these pieces. We gotta find something else as a clue before we gotta keep going here. As I was going through every piece of evidence, we had found some tapes.
There were 6 cassette tapes.
There was a second interview of Odell.
We turned back to the key informant from the original investigation. Odell.
Maybe on these tapes, he said something else.
Who even knew that those cassette tapes were even going to play after being 25 years in storage?
Are there any other details that you can recall from that conversation?
She also said that the lady had a Social Security check.
She didn't take the check?
No, she didn't take the check on the purse.
We knew the welfare check. It was still in the purse.
Only the killer would know that the victim had a welfare check in her purse.
Are there any other details that you can recall from overhearing that conversation?
She also said that the lady had a Social Security check.
She didn't take the check?
No, she didn't take the check on the purse. Just the paper money.
Now, there's no way that that information had been leaked out to the public. The only reason that Odell would have known about that check being in the victim's purse is if he had been told by Danita. If we could find a better fingerprint, I could put her inside that apartment. Back in 1987, a traffic stop was conducted. Her prints were taken on the hood of her car. At that time, just one print was noticed at the scene, but it was a partial fingerprint. We couldn't match that print up with Danita. What other evidence do we got? I have to use those photos from 25 years earlier to piece things together. I want to see it. So I'm trying to place things where it had been documented. Anna Mae's purse was laying there, right by the kitchen counter, in close proximity of where Anna Mae was found on the floor. There was a lot of blood. It was a violent scene. It was a lot. You could tell that there was a big struggle inside that place. And you're talking a small apartment. There was blood on the phone. Phone cord and the phone had a lot of blood on that. Anna Mae must have turned her back. The suspect struck her on the head with the phone. Anna Mae could have possibly grabbed a knife from the kitchen in self-defense. The suspect would have overpowered Anna Mae, taken the knife from her, then proceeded to stab Anna Mae. Then somebody came to the door, which would have been Anna's brother-in-law, Alonzo. We know that she went over and she stood next to the window by the front door, because that's where she had left a bloody fingerprint on the wall. I'm looking through the photographs, and there was a sense that there's something wrong. Something's missing, something's not where they're supposed to be. Did I miss something? I'm trying to find something that the original detectives back in 1987 had missed. Something seemed out of place. There was a jar of mayonnaise sitting on the chair by the front door. It just kind of stood out. It just seemed in a weird location. Probably wouldn't have paid too much attention to it if the mayonnaise was on the kitchen counter. If she made a sandwich for lunch, that mayonnaise jar wouldn't be sitting on the couch, it'd be in the kitchen. Maybe Danita touched the mayonnaise jar. So I started looking at the evidence list. They got the fan and the phone and the knife. Lo and behold, that jar of mayonnaise had been collected. I want to see the mayonnaise jar. I proceeded to the property room with Kim, the latent examiner, and we looked for the evidence.
We're pulling all the evidence out. I mean, we pulled everything out.
The detectives back in that era in the 70s and 80s, they didn't have the technology. Now, there's new technology where we can retest evidence.
That jar was brought back to this lab, and it was processed by superglue fuming. They use super glue, and they put it in a little metal tin with some water in the heat, and it will fume, and it adheres to all the sweat that was left behind. I looked at this over and over and over again with my magnifier, and I really examined the whole entire thing. And then right where the rim is, there was a fingerprint.
I'm like, holy crap. After 25 years in storage, she found a print on this mayonnaise jar, and she says, this is a good print.
The strange thing is that fingerprint flowed in the wrong direction on how you would open a jar, because, you know, most people would grab it like this, twist like that, but this fingerprint was just like that, as if the mayonnaise jar was held upside down, maybe as a weapon. Probably when the person knocked on the door, she panics and picked this up.
At that point, everything started making sense. Let's just compare Danita's prints to that fingerprint on the mayonnaise jar, and then we got her. I go over to the property room and look for Danita's fingerprints. But they're not in the file. They're gone. We found out that the detectives lost the fingerprint card. Unbelievable. We needed to have her fingerprinted again. So now we had to track down Danita. You know, luckily, there had been a warrant out for Danita. A real light warrant. It pays to write people for jaywalking. You know, I don't know how many cases, you know, you solved by just someone being issued a warrant for something so small.
They arrest her and they bring her into headquarters and have her re-fingerprinted.
Ralph brings me this fingerprint card and says, Kim, you need to do it quick. Compared that to the known print off the mayonnaise jar.
While Kim was going over, you know, the fingerprint, seeing if it was a match, we're doing a good interview.
Kathy could be a bull. She's wanting to admit that she killed that woman, but she won't. The only problem was, we only got a certain amount of time. It's a jaywalking warrant, it's not a murder warrant. We can't keep her here for 12 hours for something like this. If you're interviewing your suspect and this is your one and only interview and you throw something out there that they know is crap, you're done.
It was a lot of pressure because we cannot make any mistakes. We have to be 100% accurate.
After 26 years, finally we found that one piece of evidence that we needed.
Thumbprint on the mayonnaise jar. And sitting in an interview room on a jaywalking warrant, we got our suspect, Danita.
I'm looking at the print, looked at the mayonnaise jar, but it's not Danita.
The prints did not match. We're back to square one.
Kathy would call me like 2 or 3 times a week. You could tell that she really wanted to solve the case.
It made me feel good to tell stories about my aunt. Anna Mae was born in Alabama. Things were different in the South. Restrooms still had black and white on them, and they were also still sitting at the back of the bus. The Ku Klux Klan was very prevalent. It was a different time.
When Annie Mae's husband died, she didn't have no kids. My father insisted that she come here to Columbus, and
my aunt's sisters and brothers, they felt as though had they left her in Alabama, she would have still been alive.
The family didn't deserve that. This woman didn't deserve that. As a detective, they're putting all their trust in you to solve the case. It doesn't make any sense at all. Why would Odell implicate Danita? Either he was in on it or he knew he was involved.
The original detectives lost Odell 30 years ago. They just let him go.
So I did a search on driver's license, and after a couple days, we had tracked down his new home address.
We kind of felt like this is it.
We need to finish this up.
We went out to talk to him, armed with a tape recorder and the tape. And we said, Odell, we have to straighten this out.
Okay, my name is Odell.
Okay.
O-D-E-L-L.
Uh-huh.
That is you on that tape.
65 Edinburgh. That's E-D-E-N-B-U-R-G-H.
And he said, yeah, that's my address. That's my social security number. But that's not my voice.
And I was livid. I've had it. You know, this is on tape here. You know, they recorded you back then. Who else would it be?
He said, that's not me, I'll tell you why. Yeah, that's my previous address, but the way that guy's spelling Edinburgh, I couldn't have spelled that like that. Because I can't read and I can't write. It kind of shocked me, but it hit me with, he's telling the truth. He can't read and write. This case is really weird because the informant had provided accurate information. However, the information about his own personal identity and the identity of the suspect was inaccurate.
And he gets all emotional, tearing up, crying, and he got scared. Because whoever's on this tape is providing officers with his name, his social security number.
So the next question to him is, who do you know that knows that much about you? And he listened to the tape several times and said, you know who that sounds like? My cousin Chris. Back in '87, Odell used to apply for jobs at an unemployment office. His cousin Chris would always go with him, and his cousin Chris would fill out his applications.
Back in 1987, Chris is the one who came to headquarters and saying he was Odell. The original detectives didn't look at a picture ID. How stupid is that?
I want to meet Chris in person. I want to look at him. I want to talk to him. I mean, not over the phone. I want to sit across the table from him. And I want to look him in the eye.
If there was one person that could tell us the truth as to what had happened, it was Chris.
At this point, we have identified our informant and we have his real identity. Now we need to interview him. So we go up to the residence. His mom answers the door and he's sitting right there. We finally are face to face with our informant. He was getting nervous. If you called in that tip back in 1987, you're not thinking that 20-something years later, you're going to be sitting across from a couple of detectives and they're going to hit you with the facts. That would make me nervous. Explain to him, we're trying to find out who killed this woman, and good cop, bad cop stuff, forget that. You got 2 homicide detectives sitting in your house and I want to know what's going on. He denied anything about a tip. He denied it.
So I said, you're the one that initiated this. You're the one that started this back in 1987. We're just trying to finish this up. Chris was not forthcoming with any information.
Chris, family members are calling and they want to know what happened to their aunt. If something happened to your relatives, would you want us to be doing this? And he continued to deny it. We were at a point where, okay, he's not going to admit it. What can we really do?
I'd have to say the turning point was His mother. I had Chris's mom listen to that cassette tape, and I said, do you know who this voice is? We need Chris to tell us the truth. She told her son, you tell them detectives what you know. Too much time's gone by, you be honest with them. There was some trembling in his voice.
He said that he did call on the tip. He does admit to knowing Danita. He said she's innocent. Somebody else did it.
Then he told us what some other girl had told him back in 1987, the day after the homicide had taken place. He said, we were just friends. She came over and sat on my porch, and she had to tell me something. She said that she owed a drug dealer some money, and she was going door to door asking for money. Anna Mae had given her a couple dollars. She saw that there was more money in that purse. That's what took over.
This is all we need from you. We need a real name.
And he says, Zena Roberson. And he says, I've held on to this for all these years just because she was my friend. He had posed as Odell because he wanted somebody arrested for that homicide. He just didn't want Zena. And he had heard that Danita was involved in some illegal activity. Thought that, okay, she'll go to jail for this and I'll feel a lot better, you know, knowing I kept my secret with Zena. For 26 years, you keep that secret. The family didn't need 26 years of unknown. If we had not confronted him, he would never have said anything. Zena was the last suspect that we had to go on. This is my last chance. That case goes back up on the shelf. Zena was the last suspect that we had to go on. This is my last chance.
The name Zena is a real uncommon name, but in our searches, you have to have more than a name.
We knew that Zena lived 2 doors down from where Chris used to live back in 1987. After doing a computer check, come to find out, she had a driver's license when she was 16.
Finally, we get a hit. She was arrested in Georgia, a shoplifting charge.
So her prints are on file.
Had to send away for the prints. They were actually in Georgia. Kathy said, Kim, if this isn't her, you're not gonna look at any more people. This is it, I'm done.
These prints are gonna put her in that house, or the case goes back up on the shelf. I'll call Becky up and say, hey, Becky, we gave it the best shot we had. I have nothing further to run with.
I'm looking at these fingerprints. Pulled out Zena's fingerprint card. I look down on my desk with my magnifier and make that right thumb. I look at it, kind of raised up. So I look at it again. And I said, oh, got her. We got her, Zena.
We know that the fingerprints match, but we don't get happy until we make an arrest. This is the first new suspect in 26 years, and there's a possibility she's somewhere in the Rome, Georgia area. We got to the Rome Police Department, and we met with the detective that was going to assist us. Because at that point, we wasn't sure if Zena was there. They said that what we normally do for stuff like this, they have a Facebook. So they took the picture of her, put it on their Facebook page. They didn't say what for, but they just said, has anybody seen this woman? I don't think it was 2 minutes they got a response. A person answered and said, this is a lady I see at the bus stop at this intersection every morning. And we went, wow. And we said, we have this address we want to check.
We get to her apartment.
At that point, you know, you're kind of on alert. You don't know what's going to happen when she opens that door. So when you make your move, you gotta make sure you're making the right move. If there's 10, 15 people in there, that might be a real bad situation.
The door opened, and I wasn't even sure right off the top of my head that was her.
She answered the door. She could have slammed it in our faces, but she didn't.
You know, and I said, you know, we're homicide cold case detectives from Columbus, Ohio.
You could kind of read it on her face. It was kind of like between shock and relief. Kind of like, I knew you were coming. I didn't know when, but I knew this was going to happen.
She invited us in, and she reached to the ledge of the couch, you know, to ease herself into the seat. And I've never seen anything like it. But every pore on her body opened up. And I mean, it looked like a river coming from the top of her head all the way down.
You describe it as a poison, and it poisons your system, and it poisons your whole life, because you're not running, but you're not turning yourself in either.
Nothing needed to be said. It was just body language.
You know, she kind of looked down. She knew, I know why you guys are here.
She says, I used to live in Columbus, but I don't know anything about homicide. And I said, well, you gotta come with us.
We knew we had her.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I'm Kathy. This is where I kind of caught you off guard this morning.
We start the interview, and of course, right away, we want to, get through that rights waiver.
Anything you say can be used against you for what you mean.
Get that out of the way.
If you're unable to pay a lawyer will be appointed for you.
A lot of our suspects, they want to know how caught they are, and once they realize they're caught, they don't want to play anymore. You can almost hear her thinking.
Are you willing to talk with us? And or at least hear what we have to say?
Yeah, I hear what I have to say.
Okay.
The real element we needed was her to admit she had never been in that apartment, because we knew we had evidence putting her there.
But none in that apartment we believe can possibly be self-defense. But the only one that can tell us that is you.
Once the word lawyer comes out of their mouth, your interview's over. However they say it. You think I need a lawyer? Will somebody call me a lawyer? And I'm just getting the feeling that she's gonna say the word here in a minute. So I pulled out a picture of the victim.
How about this woman here? Do you know her?
I kind of wanted to shock her into this.
You ever been to her place?
You're never in her apartment. You don't know who she is. We had her in the apartment. We have 2 separate fingerprints from Zena inside Anna Mae's apartment. You can help yourself out here, okay? I'm being truthful. She said it 3 times, I believe. She had never been inside Anna Mae Florence's apartment.
Zena, tell us what happened.
We need to know.
Tell us what happened.
No, I want to know.
All right, Zena.
Good luck to you.
She just wasn't somebody you just threw away. She was somebody to care about. And I did love her, and I still love her, and she meant a lot to the family. I spoke up for my aunt in the courtroom. I don't know if she cared or not, but it made me feel good to tell her.
Kathy Justice and Ralph Taylor bring closure to Anna Mae's family. After 27 long years, the mystery of who killed Anna Mae is finally solved.
We love them, and we appreciate everything they did for us.
And we appreciate you guys all hanging together as family. Family is important.
Before there was not an ending, now there's an ending.
Becky said you was a hound dog.
Well, you know, Anna Mae, she deserves some justice out of that.
That was the first time I really started feeling peace. I felt that her spirit now can rest.
I think Brad knew something was going on, and they killed him for it.
This young man is murdered in a violent and horrific manner.
I was blaming God for what happened. He was a good guy, and why would God let him die?
This piece, we know that the suspect handled.
And I'm thinking, this case may actually get solved.
When an investigation runs out of leads, it becomes a cold case. Years pass, and hope fades. But for the families of the victims, these cases are never cold. The truth takes time. "22-year-old Brad Perry works at the local gas station in the close-knit community of Brigham City, Utah. To earn a little extra money for college and his upcoming wedding, Brad decides to work the night shift. But by dawn, he'll be brutally murdered. And the small Mormon community where he lives will never be the same again.
On Memorial Day weekend, 1984, two students, Sabah and Barish, studied all night for a final test. They wanted to put the books aside and go for a drive and have some breakfast. That was one trip that they will never forget. Approximately 3:50 to 4 a.m., the two students arrived at a gas station. They pulled up to a self-service pump.
Someone came out to serve them, which they thought was unusual. They were explicitly told not to go into the store and asked what they wanted. The student who was driving specifically asked for $5 in fuel and gave this attendant 5 $1 bills. The other student wanted cigarettes and gave him, I believe, a $5 bill. The attendant returned to the store to retrieve the cigarettes, came back out. The cigarettes came to $1 exactly, which was also odd. And 4 $1 bills were returned to the student. And all of a sudden, they noticed wet blood transferring from this person's hands. They noticed that he had blood on his fingers and also on his shoes. Immediately, they, in their words, decided they better get the hell out of there. They stopped about 5 or 6 miles down the road at the next phone booth.
Within 5 minutes, 2 officers arrived. The officers noticed that there was blood on the tile that led to the back room. A person was laying in a pool of blood, bound with a wire behind his back. He was deceased.
The victim had been stabbed with a foot-long screwdriver that penetrated through his upper chest. There was a large cast iron bell, appeared to be hit in the side of the head with that and had a skull fracture from that. The coup de grace was a large soda canister, would weigh probably in the neighborhood of 40 pounds, that was used to crush his skull.
A wallet in his back pocket, had a driver's license ID. It was quite traumatic for the officers because both officers had known the victim personally. In fact, everyone in Brigham City knew Brad Perry.
Brigham City was a small, bucolic, almost sort of a Mormon Mayberry kind of a place. Many people were related. Everybody knew everybody.
The victim and his family, they're well known for being good people. Brad had everything going for him. He was engaged to be married. He worked full-time, went to school. So there was a heartfelt concern for the family.
Back in 1984, my mom and my little brother and myself all left on a trip to go to California and go to SeaWorld. Brad stayed behind. He would take extra shifts at the gas station. And this time he took a graveyard shift to work overnight because he was trying to save money for college and to get married.
When we left SeaWorld, a friend of my husband came and said he had heard we were down there and he was in Southern California, so he thought he'd give me a ride back to the motel.
We obviously didn't have cell phones back then. My dad knew we had to be notified. He said, well, I've got a friend that is a fireman down there and he could do it. We go back to the hotel. And he took my mom into another room and told her that her son was dead.
And I said, well, what happened to him? He said, well, somebody killed him. Just like that. And I just lost it.
We started to drive toward Utah. And then I remember us on the freeway in California getting a flat tire. The worst part for me was to see my mom get out and get physically ill. I was the oldest son at that point with my brother gone. And I just was like, as a man, I was like, I gotta protect my mom. But there was nothing I could do for her. I could just see she was physically ill and I was thinking, wow, this is, I just couldn't even hardly fathom what I was seeing.
The two students from the gas station, Sabah and Barish, they were brought in for questioning. They had a police sketch artist who attempted to sketch the attendant that they saw come out and serve them as they were there at the gas station. Sabah became frustrated with the sketch artist's inability to capture what he believed he saw. He's quite a good artist, and he actually sketched 2 sketches.
They were very consistent with their description of the suspect's eyes. And they talked about the emptiness looking into those eyes and how dark they were. The officers tried to get all the information on the victim and his duties at the station. They determined that it is highly possible that someone that works at the station was involved in this crime.
For example, when Barish and Sabah pull up to the gas pumps have to be reset from inside the gas station. Somebody would have to know how to do that.
And then you have the fact the floor safe was opened up. Brad had no access to that. The only person that had a key to that floor safe was the assistant manager, Thomas Nager. Thomas Nager, that was supposed to show up for work at 6 a.m., didn't show up. The police had the crime scene secure. They had the owner of the station there. Then they noticed that Thomas Nager is in the background of all the people behind the tape.
He was expected to report to work at 6 o'clock on the morning of May the 25th, and he did not.
He didn't just come forward, which kind of brought red flags. The police described his demeanor as being nervous, kind of scared. They also noticed that the composite that the witnesses drew resembled Thomas Nager. Police asked Thomas, "How come you didn't show up for work?" He eventually said that he did oversleep, that he was at home. Brad was supposed to call him and wake him up. That didn't happen. That's why he didn't show up. In the 1980s, fingerprint evidence was where DNA is today. The technicians that dusted for the prints told us that they could tell a fingerprint just like they recognize a face.
They brought in one of the internationally recognized fingerprint experts from West Valley City in Salt Lake, who diligently worked trying to make some sense out of the fingerprints. They had the insight to use a forensic vacuum to vacuum the fight area. And it's from that vacuuming that we were able to locate some hairs. There were hundreds of prints that were compared, and yet Tom Nager's fingerprints weren't found.
Thomas Nager's prints should be at the station. He worked there for years. They should be all over that place.
We had to release him, but Nager was still considered a person of interest.
It was evening when I finally pulled in my driveway, and my friends were standing there. That was the hardest part, because then I was like, this is real.
When we got home, of course, everyone wanted the story. There were already newsmen here at the house. Yeah.
My parents have been best friends with the Perrys for as long as I can remember. My father was very much involved with helping the Perrys deal with the media. The reporters would camp out on the lawn. They were like vultures. And my father would go and tell them they needed to give them space.
Later on that evening, officers traveling on Highway 89 noticed a male walking southbound who'd matched the description of the suspect that the students provided. When the officers stopped Mr. Ellsworth, they noticed blood, not only on his shirt, but on his hands. Their thought was, we've got the suspect. They bring in the students who witnessed the person come out and pump the gas. Neither student said that Mr. Ellsworth was the person that came out and pumped the gas. It's disappointing. A lot of people thought they had the suspect.
There aren't enough links in that chain to make it link up.
We just wanted something to go forward. You keep praying something's going to happen, and it doesn't.
The Perrys, after burying their son, needed to get away.
It helped when we went to Montana because we got away from the scene.
The idea was to get our minds off of what had happened, hopefully, and get something more positive in our minds at that point.
But when they came back, they noticed that their home had been vandalized and burglarized.
Whoever did it broke into our house, vandalized it, stole some stuff, and even went so far as to defecate in Brad's bedroom. Why would somebody do something like that?
I have to admit that I am the one that said, why don't you look next door? I thought Craig Martinez was involved.
Craig Martinez lived in the same neighborhood as the Perrys and was certainly not a model citizen by anyone's stretch of the imagination.
Craig Martinez did have criminal history. People that were around Craig did not want to set him off because they knew how violent he could become. The police searched Craig Martinez's bedroom. They found items from that burglary under his mattress. The crime looked highly personal. Police had some witnesses come forward who said that Craig Martinez came up to a party up above Brigham City the night of the murder with blood on his clothing. In looking at Craig Martinez and the burglary at the Perry's house, the police found out that Craig Martinez was friends with Thomas Nager. In doing several interviews, detectives determined that Thomas Nager was dealing drugs at the gas station. In the mid-'80s, in that community, there was a lot of drug activity.
I always thought the kids went to Salt Lake or the big city in Ogden or somewhere further south, and they got their drugs there. To know that they were selling it out of this convenience store, that people knew that's where to go buy it, that was a little bit more of a shock than I expected.
At the gas station, Craig Martinez was somehow involved with Nager as a purchaser or otherwise involved with Nager's drug distribution scheme. Did Brad Perry somehow become aware of the fact that Tom Nager was dealing drugs out of the store?
Brad was a good kid. If somebody's breaking the law, Brad would have said something or even called the police.
The theory came up that Brad knew something was going on and they killed him for it.
Brad Perry was 6'1", and he had great strength. It would have taken two people, Craig Martinez and Thomas Nager, to do what they did to him. Craig Martinez, his nickname sums it up. They called him Monster. It's because he would lose it over nothing. We get the warrant on Craig Martinez to collect his fingerprints and to compare it with the evidence that we have.
But again, we couldn't make the link between the fingerprint evidence that could be found and a suspect at that point. There was not enough evidence to charge either Martinez or Nager with something related to Brad Perry's homicide. It was terribly frustrating. Everything was combed and recombed and combed again. We needed, at the very least, a witness or some evidence that would vector to a particular person. But the case was just largely at a dead end. It was a cold case.
For Brad's family, the pain of the loss remains fresh. They try to restore purpose to their lives without the person who held them together.
Now we're talking 2.5, 3 years after the murder. Nothing's really been done.
We didn't think they'd probably ever solve it. We thought we were through. And that's not fair. You miss Brad, whether it's cold, hot, or whatever it is, because he just was such a good person.
I was angry and frustrated. I just kind of backed away and started to separate myself from my parents, my family.
Lee decided to alter his driver's license to get beer, which the LDS Church does not allow.
I was struggling, not only that he'd been killed, but he was a good guy, and I was thinking, why would God let him die? And it was about that time when I discovered Brad's journals. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we are encouraged to keep track of our history. Brad liked to write in his journal what he was thinking, what he was feeling. After high school, Brad was serving an LDS mission. On his mission, he was riding his bike, and he had a terrible, terrible accident. He was in a major trauma unit down in Louisiana. He had severe facial injuries. The message I got from his journal was, these things are not God's fault. They happen sometimes. These kind of things become challenges for us, and God will bless us to overcome them. And that's where the journal brought me back from a negative direction of being mad.
Sheriff Jensen came to me and said, I know you're new in detectives, but I want to give you the Perry case. And I about fell over in my chair. I'm a spiritual person. The first thing I wanted to do is meditate with the Lord. I was in my office one day and I received an answer in my heart that this was going to be solved. I started to review the case, the photographs, fingerprints, and so on. I watched the crime scene video maybe 100 times, trying to see something that possibly we missed. We had this hair found at the scene that was been sealed and collected. What I realized was it had never been analyzed. We needed to compare the hair at the scene to the main suspects, Craig Martinez and Thomas Nager. We picked Thomas Nager up on the way to the station. He became irritated and blurted out that, "Why do you have me? You know Craig Martinez killed Brad Perry." Thomas Nager prompted me to get the warrant on Craig Martinez to collect his hair and to compare it with the hair found at the scene that has been sealed and collected.
I get a phone call one day, a friend of mine who worked in the police department, and they say, "Hey, did you hear they have a suspect in your brother's murder case?" That's the first time I knew they'd opened the case up. And I was like, really?
They weren't giving us a lot of hope. And then all of a sudden we hear that they were going to the state prison where Craig Martinez was.
And that's when we realized they were going after the hair on Martinez. They wouldn't be looking to match the hair if they didn't think he was a viable suspect at that point. And I'm thinking, this case may actually get solved.
At the time, Craig Martinez was an inmate at the state prison.
The SWAT team has to bring Martinez down because of his violent history. So they bring him to me, and he is shaved completely. He turns to me and he says, "I guess you won't be getting my hairs."
Why would you shave yourself from head to foot if you had nothing to do with this crime?
I mean, it's not like he's on the state penitentiary swim team. From a common sense perspective, who does that absent an intent to obstruct justice?
The nurse actually said, I'll find a couple. We found them. And she found 2 on his nipple.
Getting the hair evidence was to facilitate a hair fiber comparison.
If that hair sample, if they can find hair on him and match those two, we might actually find out who did this. They do the hair, it doesn't match.
Now, does that logically prove Craig Martinez wasn't present? Absolutely not. It simply proves he didn't contribute that particular hair.
We're like, okay, great, now what?
At that time, I didn't feel anything but discouragement. So I said many prayers on behalf of the Perry family, and I put their name in a prayer box at the temple.
Thank heavens, that's where Amy came in.
I wanted to try to do as much as I could for this case and for the Perrys to give them some peace. Brad would babysit for my parents when they would go and play cards with Claudia and Newell. He used to like to be the monster underneath the blanket. He'd put a big blanket over the top of him, and if you came anywhere near the blanket, he'd grab you and tickle you in, and he was just wonderful.
She had gone through law school and was a lawyer.
Approximately 18 years after Brad's death, I ran for county attorney. I just knew that it would go cold if I didn't do something. I sat down with Scott Cosgrove. I asked him, have we tested all the evidence that we have for DNA? And he told me no.
At that point in time, DNA testing was in its very beginning stages in the state of Utah, and they were pretty parsimonious with their willingness to test things. We had to go to our county commission to get some additional funding, and Amy facilitated those additional funds. The results from the DNA testing are reported to us. all of the DNA-related evidence was Brad Perry's blood.
It was incredibly discouraging for me, frankly. We didn't really have anything to be able to move forward on a trial.
And that's when I remember there's one last thing to be rechecked. The blood on the dollar bill.
All these years, the dollar bill had been stored at the state crime lab, preserved in their freezers.
The state crime lab tried to convince me that the blood on the dollar bill was the victim's. And I said, well, okay, if it is, it is. But this piece, we know that the suspect handled, and it's been in your custody ever since. A month or two went by, and that's when I received the call.
Scott tells me that we had a hit, but the name he gave was somebody we had never even heard of.
Who the hell is Glenn Griffin? We have a DNA hit on the bloody dollar bill, and it belongs to Glenn Griffin. So I immediately did all the research on who is this guy.
Mr. Griffin, at the time, was in federal custody in Lompoc, California, serving time for operating a clandestine meth lab. He'd been in and out of jail and prison for almost all of his adult life. We immediately get a hold of Griffin's probation records so we can start to build a sense of who his friends are, who his family are. That's how we located his mother.
We're driving over the hill to Hiram, not far from Brigham City. That's where Glenn's parents live. I meet with them, and I just asked them to tell me about Glenn. The mother said that they had problems with him. As he grew up, he was acting out, stealing money out of the till at the store, harming animals. And I asked for photos of him in 1984 to compare it with a suspect sketch. It was an exact match. However, I was convinced that Glenn didn't do this alone. And I asked who he associated with, and she said that he was always with his buddy Wade Mond. They got into criminal activity and drugs together. She explained Glenn was the leader. He often threatened Wade or made fun of Wade, so Wade was kind of a follower. Wade was the weak link, and if anybody would give me good information, it would be Wade.
Just after Brad's death, Wade moves to Spokane, Washington, and doesn't come back.
Based on that information, I traveled to Spokane. Spokane police said that Wade was a witness in another investigation. So I said, can we use that to get Wade to your police department where we could interview him? And they said, sure. Okay, so we got your permission to record this.
Yeah, you go ahead and do it.
Okay. And that's when we said, Wade, this is not about that incident that occurred here in Spokane. This is about the murder of Brad Perry in 1984. This is the crime we're talking about.
Oh my God.
Wade, I can't express this enough. You've got to be open and honest with us. So what happened when you got him in the back room? At first, Wade didn't want to talk.
Look at this kid. He's 22 years old. He had a fiance. He had his whole life in front of him. And somebody snuffed it out.
But then we got into the conversation, and I says, Wade, Glenn is being released from federal prison. And you could see the blood just drain from his face.
And so,
Now I'm starting to think about that night, that early in the morning. You know, I do remember this.
Wade was at the station with Glenn, and they got in an argument with Brad over beer.
The dispute arose over change that Mr. Griffin was supposedly entitled to.
Brad told them to leave the station immediately. So Glenn became irritated and confronted Brad. They got in an argument. Glenn went berserk.
It became violent. It escalated into a physical altercation in the front of the store. As that's occurring, the students show up out front. Glenn goes out.
At that point, Brad was still alive.
Glenn comes back inside the gas station. Brad is taken in the back.
Glenn tortured him, and then he killed Brad Perry. And I says, Wade, I understand a lot of that. It's being truthful. However, there's no way Glenn did this on his own. And he said this, and I'll never forget it.
That was on the guy's leg.
He was holding the legs.
Holding him down.
All I did was help tie him up and keep him down. He said, once Glenn goes off, I can't stop him.
Was you scared of Glenn?
Yeah. Okay.
Real scared.
The county attorney said that Glenn will be on a bus Monday because he's being released.
There was a short clock. We were under a stopwatch because if he's released, we knew that he would disappear and we would never be able to find him. We knew that Mr. Griffin was due to be released from federal custody in the next several days. And so Cosgrove immediately went down to interview Mr. Griffin.
When I first meet Mr. Griffin, I immediately see those dark, beady eyes that the witnesses described. And I knew at that point, we have the person that killed Brad Perry. He was familiar with the station where Brad worked, but he claimed that he's never been to that station. That's when I told him. We had a hit on his DNA on a bloody dollar bill that came from the crime scene. I said, how do you explain that?
His claim was that his blood must have got on a dollar bill because he was always cutting his hand at work, and then it would have passed in the stream of commerce to the gas station.
And at that point, he stopped talking.
We knew the case was going to be difficult to prosecute as it was because it's 30 years old. And so we needed evidence that was beyond a reasonable doubt.
We did have what Griffin's buddy Wade Mon told us about what happened that night, but he feared Glenn.
Even though Wade Mon was granted immunity, he nevertheless refused to testify. At this point, we know we have substantial evidentiary problems. We need to look at what do we have that could help us place Mr. Griffin at the gas station.
We still had the hairs that were found around the crime scene.
As we're proceeding to trial, the opportunity came up to have the mitochondrial DNA tested, which was a brand new technology, had never been used in a Utah court, and we were able to compare the hairs with Mr. Griffin's DNA.
And we have a DNA match.
That, to me, made an absolutely ironclad, unanswerable case. He might be able to explain why his blood was on the dollar bill. He might have been able to explain why his hairs were in that store. He certainly could not explain both of them at the same time, together with the drawing, in a way that was anything other than he, in fact, murdered Brad Perry. Mr. Griffin's friend, Wade Mon, was tried and the jury found him not guilty. That was a grave disappointment to me, but I respect the jury's role in this case.
Despite the acquittal of Wade Mon, the conviction of Glenn Griffin gives the Perry family some closure and helps heal a wound left open for 24 years.
I was satisfied that this was solved. I'm convinced that Brad was with me on this journey, and he wanted me to find some peace for his family.
What has helped me probably the most is the gospel, is the church I belong to. I feel that Brad's fine. He's just on to another sphere. And I feel like I'll see him again.
Because of Brad and because of his death, I think it led me to where I'm at and allowed me to do the things I've been able to do. I became a law enforcement officer to protect good law-abiding citizens from being hurt from people who are doing bad things. And that's what I do every day when I go out and do my job. Try to find the Glenn Griffins of the world.
They seen the girl being taken. That's how I found out that Shauna was kidnapped.
I just walked out on the bridge and I looked down and there she was.
You get a sick feeling in your gut. You know, I'll never forget what happened to her.
Darkness conceals a lot of evil.
He said, it's basically a cold case. It's basically dead. I said, yeah, so's my daughter.
When an investigation runs out of leads, it becomes a cold case. Years pass and hope fades. But for the families of the victims, these cases are never cold. The truth takes time. It's Halloween in the Rust Belt community of Oil City. 12-year-old Shauna Howe is leaving a Girl Scout party. Her best friend offers to walk her the extra block home. Shauna goes it alone. She would never be seen alive again. And Halloween would change forever.
I used to love Halloween. I used to love to dress the kids up. Shauna loved Halloween too. She loved trick-or-treating. She loved just anything to do with it. That year, she wanted to be a gymnast. I remember that morning, Shauna come over and she says, "Mom, I've got the Girl Scouts tonight. We've got the Halloween thing. We're going up to the nursing home."
She got dressed in her outfit. She had tights on and a bodysuit, and she had gloves on her arms, I believe.
She gave me a kiss and a hug and told me she loved me. And then she was gone. And that was it. They got out of Girl Scouts at between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. Shauna and Joey L had left together. Nobody was there to pick up Shauna because I forgot. They come out of the alley where the Girl Scout meeting was, and at the corner there, Joey L went straight down, and Shauna made the left and was coming up the street.
I was looking for her as it was getting dark. I believe the time changed just that week or so. Lucy calls, and I said, "You know, Shauna ain't home yet. What time's that Girl Scout stuff?" She says, "That should have been over."
I started getting worried. I mean, even the latest party for the Girl Scouts wouldn't last that late. I told John to call like the hospitals to see if there'd been any type of accidents or anything, because I didn't have a cell phone. But by the time I got home, it was 10 o'clock. There's no way she'd have been out there that long. And that's when I started panicking. I just called the police. The police showed up. They come to the house.
Maybe she was lost. Maybe she stayed at a friend's. I think that was the hope. And then other reports started coming in.
You know, they have the little walkie-talkie things, and there was a squeaky thing on there. They had this guy, Peyton, at the police barracks, and he's saying that they seen the girl being taken. And that's how I found out that Shauna was kidnapped.
Dan Payton was walking on West 1st Street in Oil City. He saw a little girl walking on the other side of the street. He then sees a tall, skinny guy wearing a ball cap. He hears a short scream.
She was grabbed and taken into a car that left immediately. Dan thought it was a small red car.
This is before the cell phones. So then he now, at 8 o'clock at night, has to knock on doors to have somebody call the police station.
I was a patrol officer on the night shift, 11 at night till 7 in the morning. We got called in to help look for Shauna Howe. There's a lot of emotion involved. There's a little girl missing. How could this happen? It was almost unbelievable. One of our children was missing.
Right away, we set up a roadblock. You stop people, you talk to them, you ask them if they'd seen anything suspicious.
Everybody's looking. Early on, at least 20 to 30 law enforcement officers looking for Shauna. We're looking everywhere. We're talking to people on the street, going back over again to the intersections, the area. We start to look for the vehicle. Driving the streets, just literally doing grid patterns up and down every street, every alley. There was that urgency and that concern. After 24 hours, the likelihood of finding them alive decreases almost by the minute.
We knew nothing. Just wandered the house all night long. I don't remember sitting down. I remember when the light broke the next morning, word got out everywhere. And I remember looking out the window. There's all these people in my front yard. A lot of them were friends, family. There were some people I didn't even know.
Local people started gathering to go out and do their own searches.
That's how this community responds. There were hundreds of people out, volunteers, just walking and looking. The general consensus was fear. And the pressure to bring that child home for the community and the parents was unbelievable.
I wanted to go out and search. You know, the cops are like, no, stay here in case somebody calls. What if it's a kidnapping, you know, and they want a ransom or something? So they wouldn't let me out of the house. Do you ever see like a cage lion just walking back and forth and back and forth? That's what that living room feels like. It's like walking around in circles because there's no place else to go. You just want to scream at the top of your lungs, just let me out. But nobody would.
Coulter's Hole. It's a hunting area, some swimming. It's secluded, it's private. People go out there to drink maybe alcohol underage, use drugs, those type of things.
In that area, there are some camps. And one fella was driving away from his camp to go home, and he noticed something under a bridge.
We got a call that they found something, and they specifically wanted me to identify it. I walked up to it and took a close look at it. There in the bush was her bodysuit. It had been there like overnight. The moisture was like on it.
I was on patrol duty at the time. I was called down to the scene. When I arrived, I learned what had been discovered. It now had become very serious. They tested the gymnastic suit. There were several sentinel deposits on the suit.
I'd known that with the gym clothes being there that way, that she had been raped or molested somehow.
The lab in Erie knew that they had a semen stain, and there was enough on there to get DNA. As long as Shauna's missing and we don't know where she's at, there's a chance that we might be able to find her.
You always want them to come back alive. And until you prove to me that she's not, we're looking for her like she is.
The day after the bodysuit was found, we were at the station and a call came in. This guy had gone to a nearby cottage down by Coulter's Hole. And he said, I just walked out on the bridge and I looked down and there she was. She wasn't there the day before because we were out there.
Her shoes were found on the bridge. There was a candy wrapper in close proximity. The area was combed by law enforcement the day before, and then she's found there at daylight, clearly indicating that the kidnapper had went back in during the dark with the child and then killed Shauna and disposed of her body there. To have the veracity to go into that area with the victim on the opportunity of getting caught, it was a taunt. Just like the shoes on the bridge. The likelihood of those shoes being found on the bridge, one facing one direction, one facing the other, and not falling off the bridge, that was placed there. And that denotes a sophistication that is not common among criminals. So, who killed Shauna Howe? Somebody was toying with us. Look what I did. Can you catch me?
The body's found on a Friday. It was dark, and from where the body was, there's nothing from there until the next roadway. It was a little girl. She was thrown from the trestle, which was over 33 feet high, down to the creek bed. There was, of course, physical evidence of injuries that she sustained. Her knees were scuffed and scraped. We believe that she was alive when she was thrown from the trestle. She was alive probably for 5-10 minutes, something or other, before she died. You know, I'll never forget what happened to her.
So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I hear clump, clump, clump coming up the steps. My brother Keith literally falls in my lap and says, "Sis, it's Shauna." I'm like, "No, it can't be. It just can't." And Claire wraps his arms around me, and he says, "It is, sis. I seen her." And I said, "No." And I lost it.
Lucy started crying and let out a wail that I'll never forget. I mean, it's one of those wails that goes to your soul. You know what it is. It speaks to something very primal in you. And it's the wail of a mother losing a child.
They canceled Halloween. People were keeping a real close eye on their kids. They weren't letting them out. When you have a body of that little girl, it's hard not to get a little bit emotional, but you have to look at it objectively too. We had DNA. That was the start.
It was a blood hunt.
If this case was going to be solved, you had to find a match for that DNA.
A stranger abduction is more rare than an abduction from someone that knows the victim. So you have to look first at the family.
We DNA tested her stepdad, John Brown. We DNA tested the uncles. We looked at him hard, okay?
They even wanted a DNA test for my son. And I looked at him and I said, "You want what?" And of course they're saying it's to eliminate him. Finally, John got me calmed down enough, and Carrie, John's like, "Mom, just let me do it."
Yeah, we took a DNA sample from the boy. He was probably old enough to ejaculate. You have to start getting into everybody that she was involved with. We got into her school looking for admirers, anything like that. Went through all of the Girl Scouts and their parents.
It was an intense search. There was nobody not looked at.
But we never got a hit. I felt like I was leaving a stone unturned, you know what I mean? That night, we knew that she was grabbed and probably taken into a car. There was a description of a tall, thin guy in a small red car. One of the people we were looking at was Bill Crabtree, the guy who found the body. What was he doing out there? Is he trying to throw everybody off? He was driving a small red car.
They went through the vehicle, they looked for evidence. Obviously, they got his DNA. None of that matched.
But then somebody called in and said that the description fit the guy named Ted Walker.
Ted Walker met Shauna at the pizza shop. If Walker was working, for some reason, he'd always want to give the girls a hug. And the girls would run from Walker so that he couldn't touch them.
We know he's familiar with the family and that he had a small red car.
But eventually the DNA cleared him too.
So many dead ends. Looking at family, friends, other possible motives, it just came up blank.
One of the main things I did was to interview folks around the neighborhoods where Shauna lived who had not been thoroughly investigated. Now, Michael Pruitt came under suspicion because he lived just a couple of doors down from the location of the abduction. Very suspicious guy. The day after her corpse was found, he got on a bus and left town. He became top of the list as far as potential suspect.
Michael Pruitt's house was searched.
There was a cubby hole that had been described to us. Shauna, at autopsy, she had injuries to her knees. They were scuffed and scraped. She was kept somewhere. This cubby hole would have been a good place where a child could have been contained.
Somebody would have had to keep Shauna alive for 3 days. Michael Pruitt's house was searched.
We looked at him very, very hard.
The primary focus was on this cubby hole that he had beneath the stairway. When his DNA didn't match, believe me, that everybody was upset.
There were at least 100 DNA samples taken in this investigation.
Back then, you couldn't get a DNA sample with a swab. We had to take them in for blood tests. Anybody that I looked at hard, I got DNA samples from them.
There's a reason they took 100 DNA samples. That was somebody that somebody was looking at and saying to themselves, here's our suspect. The list was going on and on and on.
You didn't do anything wrong. Let's get your, let's get your name out of it. I couldn't tell you how many of those we did over that couple of years period. All the DNA tests came back negative. It was negative with all of them. It was negative with all of them.
I'm on my night off. I get a call from Officer Tom McClellan. He said, Winter, we need you down here. Somebody just tried to abduct a girl. I said, what? They tried to kidnap her. They beat her up pretty bad. She's down here. I need you down here. She was walking down the street. He stalked her. He followed her out and tried to bushwhack her. It's a violent attack, and they're trying to put somebody in the trunk of a car who's capable of doing something like this. Jimmy O'Brien is. Tim and Jim O'Brien were brothers. Timmy older than Jim. There wasn't a cop here that didn't know the O'Briens. They're sexually violent offenders. Jimmy in particular. The guy's evil. The victim said, I just know if I'd gotten in the trunk, I'd be dead. So I fought with everything I had. I arrested Jimmy for attempted kidnapping, this crime. It was on the same route that Shauna had walked home. It was on East 2nd Street, the same area she had left and went through. We were still having our meetings about Shauna Howe. And I said, have you looked at the O'Briens?
We knew who the O'Briens were. I arrested both of them many times, but they couldn't have done Shauna's kidnapping because they had been in jail when that occurred.
There still were no answers. I had bought a computer and got the internet, and they had that thing on there where you could go and see where all the pedophiles were around you and stuff. And when I pulled that up, I got the shock of my life of how many pedophiles lived around me. The person that took my daughter and killed her could be walking up and down the street in front of my house, and I wouldn't know it.
Around Halloween, we always had extra patrols because when you don't know who did it, you don't know when they'll do it again. That killer's still out there. There's always dread every time a child came up missing for 30 minutes and you found him at the neighbor's. Oh my gosh, did this happen again? It was the 5-year anniversary of the day they found Shauna Howe that Shanae Freeman came up missing out of her backyard. 5-year-old little girl, gone, disappeared. The family looks for a period of time before they call us. So it is going from dusk till dark. Darkness conceals a lot of evil and a lot of things.
That's 5 years later, there's still no arrests, there's still no suspects. So the fear kicked back in again. Are they at it again?
When I came down to the station, there's hundreds of people waiting outside, wanting to hear something. It was fear. There's nothing but fear that gripped the community. How could this happen again? I was thinking about Shauna Howe. I asked God, get me on my best game, man. Give me help. Because that same fear was still there. It's getting dark. The boogeyman's out there. He's back.
We heard that another girl had went missing. That brought up the idea of, could it be connected? Because it was around Halloween time too. And we decided to go and help that family because their daughter was missing, their child was missing.
There was a tremendous amount of pressure put on those persons investigating this case, but we had a whole different game. We were ready here. Search was immediately put underway. We had no eyewitnesses that observed her abduction. So we wanted to talk to anyone that was in the search party or around the scene at the time of the incident. There was a young man that didn't look right. His name was Nicholas Bowen. I saw him hugging Shanae's mother, and he said, "We're gonna help, we're gonna find your daughter and bring her home." When I talked to him, his body language, it didn't seem right. When you get in close to someone like this, they'll start to lean into you. And if you can just casually, physically touch them, they'll collapse on you if you got it right. I said, "I'm asking for your help because I think something bad happened." He laid his head in my chest and started to cry, and he's like, "She's hurt bad. She's bleeding bad." And I said, "I've seen a lot of people bleed bad and live. You gotta get me to her." We discovered Shanae buried in a shallow grave. When you see what's done with a child, it's just evil.
I heard that mother let out that scream, and I knew what it was. Once you hear it, you would understand it because it's the most soul-touching scream that a woman will ever let out.
Most people knew that he'd been arrested. There's a couple hundred people across the street, easy. He was 6'2", 200 some pounds. You know, a man by every other standard but his age. He was only 17 and a half. That would have put him at 12 at the time. Nicholas Bowen was too young to have been involved in Shauna Howe's murder.
When they said that they had found the guy and that he wouldn't have been old enough when Shauna was murdered, I was mad. I mean, I've been waiting 5 years and there's still nothing. You don't have any more information to give me in '97 than you did in '92. From the outside looking in, what have you done?
The leads slowed. Sometimes nobody would call anything in for weeks. After a while, it got to a point where I was pretty much on my own. Somewhere around that time, I retired, and it went cold.
He said, "It's basically a cold case. It's basically dead." I said, "Yeah, so's my daughter."
The investigation grinds to a halt, and time moves on. But the Howe family still needs answers. No longer a patrolman, Rich Graham now works as a detective to close the Howe case.
You're trained not to become personally involved in any case, but how do you not, particularly a child who's murdered this way?
He came to the house one day and he introduced himself. He looked me right directly in the eyes and he says, "I'm gonna solve this." You know, there was no hesitation. After years waiting for somebody to do anything, it felt good.
I continue to carry a normal caseload.
He had, I believe, 72 cases. But every night, he was reading the Shauna Howe case.
I'm slow.
He's dyslexic.
When I read something, I read it several times to make sure it sinks in and I've got it right. Sometimes the second or third look, you'll see maybe a word or a phrase that you didn't pick up on the first time.
He looked at the autopsy photos and he looked at the coroner's report and he said, "This doesn't make sense."
One of the things was a mark we saw on her cheek. It appeared to be a partial shoe print. And there was not even any mention of that in the autopsy. Betsy and I went to see Helbert Fillinger, a renowned medical examiner. We reviewed photos of Shauna's corpse. Helbert agreed that that appeared to be a shoe print we saw on her cheek. He said this was a violent rape. Pretty sick. He said somehow they held her in captivity for a couple of days, but there's no evidence of any restraints. That suggested to him that it was quite possible that more than one person was involved. For many years, I always believed that it probably was just one person. This was an oh moment.
This is not one person. This is most likely two and probably more.
There was only DNA from one suspect on Shauna's body. And that may be the basis for thinking there was only one person involved. But that's not necessarily true. Just because you don't have a DNA match does not mean that the person wasn't involved or had knowledge of the crime or assisted in some way.
We decide to do a big sweep again. We go back to all the local departments. One of the places we went was the fire department. 1992. The fire department got called to a fire in a red car. That car belonged to Ted Walker. Ted Walker's name had been brought up numerous times. He had met Shauna at a pizza place. Walker opened his house to young kids in the area. It was like a little bit of a flop house. And Ted fit the description perfect. If Walker's car was the Chevy Chevette the witness saw, and he fit the description, throw that together with a car being set on fire, did Ted have her in the back seat? Did something take place back there? I think that that was done to destroy evidence.
Mr. Walker, are you aware that this conversation is being recorded?
Yep.
And
No problems.
You do not have a problem that it's
Nope.
being recorded? Thank
Nothing
you.
to hide.
Mr. Walker was interviewed here by the state police on more than one occasion.
How is it did you first learn of Shauna Howe's abduction? Tim and Jim O'Brien came and told me.
He hears about the case from Jim and Tim O'Brien, who come into his house. He could have made up any name. Nobody would have been able to question him on that.
They just came running in telling me that a little girl, a girl was kidnapped downtown.
Ted Walker says the O'Briens told him about Shauna's abduction. So I asked Chuck Daly, hey, Chuck, do you ever look at the O'Briens? And Chuck said, yeah, they were in jail. They couldn't have done it. That's when I realized I had never seen a report documenting that they had been in jail on the night of the abduction. So that's when I get a hold of Trooper John McClain, who was a friend of mine. I told him, I'd like for you to get out and check if the O'Briens were in jail when Shauna was abducted. And then he came back to me and said, Rick, they weren't there. They had bonded out. Now I'm believing that these guys are good for this. And we've spent all these years and all these resources, all the while believing that they were incarcerated. I'm high on the O'Briens. And I went down to interview Tim O'Brien at the county jail. Tim O'Brien was in jail for sexually assaulting a girl. And his brother, Jim O'Brien, had been arrested by the Oil City police for trying to abduct a woman, trying to stuff her into a trunk. It was really a brief conversation. I said, oh, Tim, would you mind giving us a DNA sample for the Shauna Howe case? And he hesitated just for a couple of seconds, and just the way he responded, he said, well, I'll have to check with my attorney. And as I went to leave, I saw this candy wrapper. Chill went down my spine. Chill that starts up at your neck and runs down to your tailbone, and kind of a little shiver. I want to get the DNA because I think these O'Briens are good for this. After all these years, I think we may have finally found them, the killers. Early February is when I got the call from the crime lab. Jim O'Brien's a match.
When the DNA is discovered, Ted Walker's name comes in as the one who mentions the O'Briens. It just adds up. It is 3 people. Jim and Tim O'Brien and Ted Walker.
Ted Walker was arrested as an accessory to the homicide of Shauna Howe.
We're going to take this back to 1992. We know that a witness saw somebody walk up to Shauna Howe. Isn't that right?
Right.
And who was that person the witness saw?
Me.
Right. So you walk up to her, and as you're approaching her, you ask her what?
She was selling Girl Scout cookies.
Okay. And why do you ask her that?
Because I like ordering Girl Scout cookies.
Well, I know that, but
just make her feel at ease.
Make her feel at ease? Then what do?
Well, I grab a hold of her and take her back.
Did you grab her?
How around the shoulders.
You grab her?
Carry down, hand her to Tim.
You hand her to Tim.
So there's Walker handing her off to somebody, but then there's somebody driving the car. And they're all 3 involved in that.
You get back to your house. What's the next thing that happens?
They come in carrying Shauna. I'm going up the steps.
The O'Briens, those guys have a little girl that to them, that's a playground.
Once they got upstairs, I heard her screaming, struggling. Leave me go, get off me.
He actually, I think, one time he yells at them to keep her quiet, and they want to know then, how do we keep her quiet? And he says, well, get her some candy.
We picked Halloween night. It was only supposed to be a prank.
And other than Walker, these guys have never talked. These guys have never admitted what they did. But what happened, I think, is they assaulted her upstairs. Then they left, and that's when they went out to Coder's Hole. But this bodysuit, I think they took her and they assaulted her again out there. Now this child doesn't have clothes. So they kept her in that car overnight, in the trunk. She had these brush burns on her knees, and I think that was from the carpeting in the car.
We know we had an alpha male in Jimmy, and he was a true sociopath. We know we have Timmy, who was the follower. Then we have Ted Walker, who plays the dummy, but he's not the dummy at all. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Ted could have been the mastermind right behind Jimmy.
At some point, they decide that they've had their way with her, their pleasure or whatever. Perhaps the heat is on now because there are all these investigators in town, so they decide she can identify us, we got to get rid of her. They take her out and throw her off that trestle. I'm glad for Shauna, but the other thing is, I just feel sad. I feel sad that this happened to her, that she didn't get to grow up and live a normal life.
The detectives of Oil City deliver justice as the O'Briens and Ted Walker are imprisoned for the murder of Shauna Howe. And after 13 years, the Howe family finally has the truth. And hopefully, some kind of peace.
I think about her every day. I miss her every day. But I can say I love you, Shauna, and go on with my day. I'm not frozen in that time anymore. I love my daughter. I miss her with everything that's in me. But she's not in pain. What they did to her can't hurt her anymore. And I know I still love her till this day. And that's not going to go away, no matter what.